into the things that they don't know. And so many of these changes that come about cause fear. And if you can take that fear and reduce it and show them how this is going to be a benefit. You know, you have some.
All right, guys, we got to get rolling here.
All right, bye.
It is 10 o'clock. Benjamin, tell me when we are streaming. Oh, we're streaming. Hi, everybody. So we're going to give this just a second to boot up. We've got several folks already watching, and that's great. This is round 3. Ding, ding, ding. I feel like I want to say, let's get ready to rumble, right? But I don't think we're going to rumble. I don't know. John might make me mad here in a minute. But good morning. How you guys doing? You guys have just been chit-chatting away, and I chimed in for about 2 seconds because I had a lot of stuff going on here in my office. It's 10:01, so we got to get going. I don't get to chit-chat with you, and I'm sorry about that. But good morning, appraisers. My name is Bryan Reynolds. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by the fine folks of Appraiser eLearning. We're glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here, and I'm glad my guests are here. We had an ice storm this morning, and was kind of sliding around a little bit coming in. Krista called me a while ago and said we probably need to reschedule we're supposed to go look at 2 houses this afternoon, and we're probably going to reschedule those because it's supposed to get kind of nasty out there. So hopefully our client will extend those due dates because this is Mother Nature, not my fault. Anyway, you're watching round 3. And Benjamin, I assume you put this in the chat or a link so that our folks can. Oh, Miss Diana, you're.
I'm so sorry. No, I'm sorry. I was trying to pull it up for me, and
she just trying to cover up my face.
That's all right. I apologize.
So all of you watching, if you miss round 1 or round 2, you can go back and watch that. This is being streamed via YouTube. That's how you're watching us right now. And we would ask that you go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and then that will keep you in the know. This broadcast, for instance, is what we call a special edition webinar. Our regularly scheduled webinars are the 4th Thursday of every month. They're free. We've got one coming up. What did we name it, Ben? I did that in my sleep yesterday. I think it was called, what did I call it?
Training and retaining trainees.
Training and retaining trainees. I came up with that, but I forgot it already. So we've got a gentleman from Illinois, Patrick, that's coming on at the end of the month. And I think he has 5 trainees. He personally has to have some of his other folks be their supervisor, right? Because most states will have a maximum that you can have or a cap. And then I think he's got 5 certified folks. He's got like 10 people in his office doing very, very well. So we're gonna interview him and talk to him and find out what his secrets are in the way of building that appraisal practice. And many folks are interested in that. And so I look forward to that conversation. If you miss any of this, it is recorded. And to move forward, I want to go over one thing real quickly. Benjamin's putting that in the link, I believe. It is the FHFA request for information on appraisal-related policies, practices, and processes. And there were 4 major topics. I highlighted them. The first one was appraisal modernization, and I think pretty much the first webinar we had addressed that directly. The second item is updating the uniform appraisal data set and redesigning the appraisal form, which we talked about a little bit last time. And we started in the topic of AVMs, automated valuation models, and appraisal waivers. And then the last item on this that we will get to today is valuation differences by borrower and neighborhood race. So those are the topics that we've covered in this 3-part series webinar. And I want to thank all my guests for not only being here today, but also for being here for all 3 episodes. It's amazing that I find folks that are willing to be on the camera, more or less, come back 3 weeks straight. So genuinely, thank you, each and every one of you, for being able to set some time aside for us and the viewers. Thank you very much for donating that time. Very quickly, I'll let you each introduce yourself, but be very concise if you don't mind. Miss Diana Jacob, please.
I live in Lafayette, Louisiana. I am an appraiser. I deal mainly with complex situations, so I work with appraisers in complex assignments. I'm also a USPAP instructor, and I also have my IDEC instructor certification, and I was doing the business before certification, so I've been here for a long time.
Very cool. Melissa Bond.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bond, and I am a 29, almost 29-year certified residential appraiser in the deep, deep south of Mississippi. And I'm also a continuing education provider in about 12 states now. Glad to be here, Brian.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa, for being here. And we're going to be down in Melissa's neck of the woods real soon. We have the ACTS conference, the Appraiser Conference and Trade Show, that is hosted by Appraiser eLearning, as well as the National Association of Appraisers. That is in April. Benjamin, if you look up the dates and you can put those for us, you get 14 hours of CE, and you hear a lot of dynamic speakers, and you're not just stuck with one. So if you get one boring one, just hang tight for an hour, and then you'll have a whole slate of other speakers speaking. But it's a great time. If you've never been to an appraisal conference, we highly encourage and recommend that you do so. We're gonna have a good time. We've got some Cajun food on the menu, and I think there's a deep sea fishing event and a golf scramble, and just a lot of good interaction. So we're very excited about that. Mr. John Brenan, I think, is going to be there. And John, if you don't mind, introduce yourself to the viewers.
Well, thanks, Brian. Yes, you're right. I will be there. I'm looking forward to it very much. John Brenan, former regulator of the state of California, and a lot of time with the Appraisal Foundation. Currently, the chief appraiser for Clear Capital. Again, thanks for the invite. I enjoy this very much.
John's a good sport. You know, I'll call him. It's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm working. I'm like, I need you. He's like, when? He's thinking, a month from now. I'm like, in 5 minutes, I need you to hop on. And normally he's a good sport, and he's able to accommodate that. So thank you, John, for being here. And last but not least, Mr. Scott Rose, please let our viewers know who you are.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Scott Rose. I'm a certified residential appraiser, and I am now the Chief Innovation Officer at Class Valuation. I'm definitely passionate about our industry and want to see great things happening, and I'm glad to be here today. Thanks, Brian.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. And again, thank you to all the panelists for coming back and joining us. It's been an eventful long 3 episodes. And we're going to give this one just as much energy and conversation as we did the other 2. I'd like to remind all of our viewers, you can ask questions. And that's what we like about our webinar series. They're a little different than others. You get to ask live questions. Most webinars that you view, if they even let you ask questions, you have to send them in like a week in advance or something. And that's probably so the panelists can look up the answers and be prepared and not be, called out off the cuff. We do ask that you be very professional and be civil, although hard questions are okay. Hard questions are allowed. They bring a lively debate, and I encourage the hard questions, just not to me, my panelists, please. So please type your questions into the chat, and Ben will send those over to us, and we'll get to as many as those that we possibly can. So let's just dive into the topic here. We've got a good hour to spend together, and I'm going to back up because we started on the AVMs and the appraisal waivers, and we didn't get through. So I want to spend a little bit of time on those, and then we'll get to that last category about neighborhood and race and that type of thing. So we talked quite a bit about appraisal waivers. I don't think we talked as much about AVMs. So I want to go there for a minute. Before I do, John, do you know what the percentage of appraisal waivers are right now? Is it 50, 60, 70%? What are we looking at?
I mean, it varies, Brian. I mean, based on the information that we've seen from the GSEs, and it's not something that they really officially publish, but it depends on the type of loan. We've got purchases, you've got cash out refis, you've got regular refis, but there are areas with refis that we've heard as high as 70%. I think overall we've heard numbers closer to 40%. And I think that it's important because as appraisers and as being passionate about this profession, our initial reaction is, waivers are bad. That's taking appraisal work away. But if you look at the appraisal volume over the last year, it's been at an all-time record, and loan volume has been at an all-time record. So as we kind of said on the last one, I mean, my belief is that there is a place for waivers. It definitely makes sense in some circumstances. What we don't want is waivers to be used instead of appraisers in situations where appraiser really needs to be involved.
And is that happening?
I can tell you that I don't look. We don't have privy to the loans that and the exact individual circumstances where they're being used. I can say this: that look at the loan volume. Appraisers have had their plate full over this last year. So there is excess volume. Whether or not that volume that's gone to waivers was perfectly appropriate for that or more appropriate for appraisers, I think you're going to have a mix. I think it's going to kind of cover the waterfront. I do think that the GSEs are not being willy-nilly with the waivers. I do think that they have criteria that they use. Whether or not we all agree on whether that criteria is exactly what we think it should be, there are other aspects of the loan that we may not be privy to, the borrower's credit history and all the other things. That all goes into that decision as to whether or not a waiver is appropriate.
Yeah. So Scott, I'll direct that exact same question to you. Or are you privy to any information, or we got to know some slip through the cracks, right? Are waivers being used in certain instances where you feel maybe they shouldn't be being used? Where did we start? 50% loan to value or wherever it was. Now we're up to 70% loan to value. And then, it was just for refis. And then we bleed over and take, we always want to extend that line a little bit. Well, it seems to be working. Maybe we'll go to 80% LTV. How about 100% LTV? How about on 100% purchase transaction right now? Are we doing those? Or are we going too fast with this? What are your thoughts, Scott?
Well, I agree with John. Yeah, no, I agree with most of what John said. And yes, we have inched our way into more eligibility over the last few years. There hasn't been a lot of changes, though, that I think some people don't recognize that. I think I might have mentioned this on the last webinar. I think it has a lot more to do with the environment than it does the criteria right now. The amount of waivers that we're seeing is because the massive rate drop environment and the transactions that have seen appraisals on them in the recent past that allows for a higher eligibility rate because of that, right? So they're looking at loans, and I do think that their criteria, again, we don't have all insight to their models and what they use, but I believe that they're using cautionary algorithms to try to select the loans that best fit criteria to be used for waiver. If we look at purchases, I think it's less than 10% of loans that have waivers on purchases. So I really do believe it's this high rate term refi population, non-cash out, that is seeing this really large number of waivers on them right now. And I think that's because a lot of those loans or homes and individuals had transactions on their properties and themselves in the recent past that gave them confidence in that. And you have to understand, if you've got somebody in a home that you recently appraised that's been making regular payments and you're reducing their actual monthly mortgage payment, you're actually putting yourself in a better risk position than you were yesterday because it's more affordable for them to make that payment. And I think that's how they're applying these waivers. With that said, I think it's important that, I'll weave in a little bit of the modernization side to this. I think this is where appraisers can look to adapt and do look for other ways to solve and provide their services in a fashion that will not push people to look for waivers more so down the road. I do believe that most people I talk to at the GSEs and in the regulatory environment, which I spend a lot of my time is spent in DC and with all of these folks and these stakeholders, mortgage insurance companies, rating agencies, secondary market investors, they care about collateral, and they like appraisals, right? They want appraisals. And so we just need to continue to provide solutions that allow us to continue to be relevant and support the marketplace with scale, so that we can offer our services to those folks who really do care about it and want to see appraisals continue in the market. So that's that position on it.
So Scott, a moment ago, you said that theoretically they're in a better position because, and let me just, I got to break stuff really down low for me to understand, because I'm not that bright of a guy. I always say, thank God appraising isn't that hard. And it's not, it's really just a bunch of common sense. If appraising was hard, I wouldn't be able to do it because I'm not that bright. So I got to break it down. I got to dumb it down for me, right? Not probably for anybody else. But you said a moment ago, they're probably a little safer because hypothetically, let's say that somebody took out a loan, a couple of years ago, they had 5.25%. Now they're going to refinance down to 2.75%, right? So it's going to make them be able to afford that payment. So an appraisal waiver might make sense. And all those things you said, while I'm agreeing with you, but I think there's one caveat there. That assumes that the property is in still decent condition. That assumes that over the last 2 years that they've owned that property, that they haven't completely destroyed the property. Would you agree with that statement?
I would.
Okay. So there is still risk with an appraisal waiver in that scenario, even though it may be a minimized, risk. I get it. There is still a level of risk associated with that. And maybe the lender is willing to take that risk. Diana, I want to loop you in on this. I think one thing Scott said is very true, that people care about the collateral. If we look back historically speaking, right? Back in the 1980s, when the rate was 18%, had to have a 30% down payment, right?
I remember it.
I was just a little boy back then. But anyway.
But I was a much younger girl, but I was not
I was
by any stretch of the imagination.
I hate to admit I was around. But times were hard for real estate agents selling houses, builders. You're looking at a house and you're like, man, I like this house. I might want to buy it. And you open up the garage and there's a new car there. Oh, somebody already bought this. There's a car in the garage. No, John, you buy this house, you get a free car. Right. I mean, they had to get really creative in selling real estate back then. So back then, it seems like the lenders were very concerned with the collateral. In fact, a few years prior to that, we didn't even have appraisal licensing. There was no such thing. And yet the banks made sure that you were competent in appraising property because that was collateral for the debt. Somewhere along the way, we went from a collateral-based lending society to a credit-based lending society. We don't care as much about the collateral. We want to make sure John has a 750 credit score, right? Then we had a housing crisis. We had a savings and loan crisis back in the 1980s, 08, right? We had another housing crisis because you could get those liar loans. If you guys haven't seen the movie The Big Short, watch that. It kind of talks about the housing crisis and how we, as taxpayers, bailed everybody out of that nonsense. Do you think that we're priming up, Diana, for another house, or maybe I should reword this, the next housing crisis? Because there's going to be another one. It just, when's it going to happen? Are we priming?
Economic, and I'm not an economist, but economics history tells me every 20 years we shift. Every 20 years, there seems to be a correction of some sort. What is different now, I think, is that we have been on this low interest rate run for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And I think equity has occurred because the demand for housing, which is still at an all-time high, continues to exist because people can see themselves being able to pay that note at this interest rate. I think, and I'm going to say something that's probably going to be a dirty word for a lot of people, I think we would all, as an economy, probably benefit from a little bit of a raise in the interest rate. But that makes everybody nervous.
There's no precedent in this program.
Well, I'm sorry, but I just think it's probably getting time. And people have, at this point, what we have going on now is just so different than any of our other economic times because of the invisible man, the pandemic. That has got an uncertainty built into it that we've never had to deal with before, but it has not, that I can see, stopped people from buying houses. It just hasn't. So, our houses continually going, and it's not houses that actually appreciate. I love what you said one time, Bryan, and I've stolen it and used it many times. Houses get torn down before they wear down. And so the value is in the land and the location. Houses depreciate from the moment they're built. But you have this balance of, inflation for materials, and that tends to make things go up. And so we do all of our work. Where do I see it going? Do I think we're going to move into a foreclosure period? I do. My personal opinion is yes, I do, for a number of reasons. And one is that we have put off the forbearance and the foreclosures and the moratoriums for a very long time now. And I remember when we had the housing crisis, they periodically let out the door how many foreclosures were. They managed it. They said, okay, we're only going to foreclose on this many, because if we had been hit with everything that was due, we just could not have survived it. The story is, and I'm probably slaughtering it, but they kept wanting to know what was going on with the supply of these rocks that were coming out of this quarry. And it turns out it wasn't the rocks that were being stolen, it was the wheelbarrows. So sometimes our eyes get shifted economically and we miss it. But personally, yes, I think it's coming.
Yeah. So Melissa, let's talk about that for a minute, because part of this topic is on AVMs. And we'll go to, Scott and John in just a second and find out how often are those occurring for lending decisions, because I don't know. But Melissa, what are your thoughts with AVMs? I just had an editor call me and interview me, and one of the things we were talking about was AVMs, and she said, just as a research project in writing this article, I pulled up my own house. And she said, I had 3 different ones that say what your house is worth. And she said, I had a difference of $80,000, from the low to the high. And so she said, if I relied on these things, I have no clue where I'd be, a difference of 80 grand. And so is there a place for AVMs, or someone said the other day, maybe an appraiser assisted AVM? I don't know. Melissa, your thoughts?
Okay, well, I would say my thoughts on an AVM would be it does have its place in some particular lending situations, some with that extremely low risk and all other factors being very favorable. It does have a place. Now, the only thing that I'd like to say about an AVM versus an appraiser or a valuation expert is the AVM lacks judgment. The AVM is wonderful at picking up property characteristics, physical characteristics, things such as that. But there's a reason that USPAP says that an appraiser needs to be geographically competent, because that means we understand the area. Try as they may, and some AVMs are very sophisticated. I have seen them on, when I was on the, on the federal side, I've used them, but they lack judgment. Very good tool in some areas, not in all areas. So I think that we should use them with caution.
Yeah. So let's bring, my lenders or AMC guys in here for a minute. One thing that we all need to remember is that when a market participant buys a house, and I'm not talking about an investor or somebody buying an Airbnb or something like that. I'm talking about you're buying your house that you're going to turn into a home and you're going to live there and raise your family. In most instances, this is the biggest asset a typical consumer will ever have in their life. Should we really be relying on Zillow or some of these models that are out there available that don't go into the house? They don't put eyes on it. Should we be relying on those? And if so, to what extent? Scott, what level of AVMs are used, and should they be used?
Yeah, I mean, my response to that is we don't, right? We don't use AVMs in origination in themselves, right? There are certain populations of loans that leverage an AVM in an origination process, but the condition does have to be taken into consideration. So if you have a strong process that is, regulatory compliant, you're going to have some sort of property condition assessment done to be able to use that AVM in the origination process. Typically, AVMs in themselves without that are only used for portfolio monitoring, trying to understand if you have a servicing portfolio, what homeowners may benefit from a refinance based off of the, a broader view of a bigger picture of loans, or in some sort of risk analysis when you're looking at thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of loans or homes. That's where AVMs get used mostly today, or in some scenarios with HELOCs and things of that nature. But they do have to take condition into consideration, and that came from post-crisis with Dodd-Frank. So that is a statutorial requirement, right? So I think sometimes people misunderstand, and honestly, even with Zillow, right? I have a good friend, realtor here in Boulder, Colorado. She sells a lot of homes, and her number one conversation with someone listing their home is talking to them about, why their home is maybe not worth what Zillow said it was, right? So I think having a professional involved in these transactions is an important part of the process. AVMs are great for certain purposes, but not to originate loans.
Yeah, so I know that most doctors hate Google, right? Because a patient will call up and say, hey, I think I've got this going on. Well, what makes you think you have that going on, Scott? Well, I Googled it and it said this rash is this, blah, blah, blah. And the doctors hate it. Come in here, schedule an appointment, let me see you, right? And I think that's what a lot of the appraisal community thinks too. Let me see that practice. Let me do what I've been trained and what I've done for decades. Let's look at the science behind it, but there's some art there too. Let me look at that. John, what are your thoughts with Zillow and basically Googling what's my house worth? I see real estate professionals, agents advertise that in a way for a lead source. Click here to find out what your house is worth. Well, how reliable is that stuff? I almost said junk.
Yeah, well, I but just the very nature of your question, I would tend to agree with you. There's a couple of things I want to say here. First of all, my dear friend Melissa, in describing this issue, said AVM versus appraiser. What we have to do is get out of that mindset. It's not AVM versus appraiser. AVMs are one thing for one purpose. Appraisers may be able to use them as tools, but it's critical to understand, to your question, Brian, that not all AVMs are created equal. There is a huge difference between the consumer grade AVMs that you talk about, like when you Google what's my house worth, versus lending grade, industry grade AVMs with the sophistication that they have. There are amazing things that AVMs can do in many situations. There are equally amazing things they cannot do in certain situations. AVMs should not, as appraisers, we look at this as a black box, and we look at this as the potential dark side to take our work away and things like that. We've got to stop thinking of them that way. Appraisers bring a value. They bring something to the table that an AVM may not be able to do. But here's the key. There needs to be a national set of standards for AVMs. Because when people go and look at these consumer grade and other AVMs, they are not apples to apples. Right. And unfortunately, some of the ones, and I'm not going to mention any names, but some of the ones that started coming on early and people would put in their house, and appraisers, how many appraisers have put your address into one of these to see what it says? And you're like, no way, it's not even close. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what we're talking about on a lot of the ones like Scott mentioned that are used in portfolio and servicing and other things today, lending grades. So it's really important to have some national standards that will specify what AVM should and should not do.
Yeah. So we're getting a lot of questions in here, and I want to get to some of those. We've got to move on to our next topic. And guys, we're already at the halfway mark. And it looks like John's drinking a Coors Light. I'm not sure if that's what it is. But that sure looked like it. I'd like to remind our viewers, you're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. These are free, so it's a good price for you. We have a regularly scheduled webinar the fourth Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. You're watching a special edition webinar, and the way you can stay in the know and figure out when these are going to occur, hit the subscribe button right now. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you will be in the know when we have a special edition webinar like we're having today. And these sessions are all recorded, so you can go back and Ben, what we've been doing is about three years now or something like that. I don't know. But you guys can go back and watch all of them if you want to. We've had Jim Park with the ASC. We had John Brenan on when he was with the Appraisal Foundation. We've had a wide variety of guests throughout the years, and those are all still available that you can go back and watch those. So let's get back to it, guys. I'm going to ask a few questions or read. Some of them are just comments. So let me just read through several of these, and then we've got to move to our last category because I want to spend ample time on that because that's a hot topic as well. William T says, any thoughts on how appraisers can use AVMs and regression modeling in appraisals as a fourth approach to develop value, using confidence intervals as opposed to a point value system? Anybody got any comments on that one?
I would just say real quickly, take a look at Advisory Opinion 18 in USPAP. It talks about use of automated valuation models and can talk about how it can be used as a tool for appraisers.
Thank you, John. Brian says appraisers aren't holding anything hostage. Make a product or process that can be done outside of USPAP with less liability and records keeping that can be done by appraisers. That's Brian. Martin said computers don't buy houses. People do. AVM should be used based on risk. Thank you, Martin. I think we would probably all agree with you there. Who decides caution? The rules are blurred when the lender rep decides caution. Will the lender be held to a higher standard? Margie. Scott, any comments on Margie's question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bank examiners are in there looking at processes that originators use to originate loans. And that's where they're held accountable, is by the regulatory body in terms of how they make decisions to use these practices within their lending processes.
Okay.
I'd like to interject something here about the comment on, outside of USPAP. If you're a state certified appraiser, USPAP is voluntary, always has been, except for, if by law, if by choice, if by agreement. And if you're state certified as an appraiser in most states, I won't say all, I can't speak to all, but in most states, it's going to have a reference to USPAP. So it doesn't matter really what kind of product comes out. It matters what the appraiser can be held legally accountable for. And we need to always keep that in mind, I think.
Thanks, Ms. Diana. All right, guys, on to our last category, and I want to spend ample time on this. So I may hold you guys a couple of minutes after if I can. This last topic was valuation differences by borrower and neighborhood race. Recent articles indicate concerns with undervaluation of residential properties in minority communities. And there's a whole section on this. It's talking about a Brookings Institute study, systematically lower median listing prices in the majority of Black zip codes. Studies show that there may remain significant disparities in valuations for properties in minority neighborhoods. It goes on to say, and I found this one very interesting on page 19, appraiser interviews show that some take racial and ethnic composition of the neighborhood into consideration when selecting comparable homes, even when there are comparable homes located closer to the subject property. Now, I'm going to let the panelists talk on this because that just makes me mad. I mean, you have an appraiser admitting to they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. And quite frankly, you're not an appraiser if you're doing that. If you're factoring in a bias, right, get out of this business because you don't belong here. You are not an appraiser. You don't meet the definition of an appraiser. And so I'm going to stop before I really get mad. John, your thoughts on what I just read?
Yeah, well, obviously this is a big issue, and this is something that has really come to the forefront. Brian, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, first of all, are there appraisers that are racist? Probably. Are there plumbers that are racist? Probably. Electricians? Probably. Is there a systemic racism problem in appraising? I don't think so. Certainly not conscious. There's unconscious bias, which I think a lot of us are learning about, thinking about how we've grown up with things, how we think of things. But I think it hurts us as appraisers more than a lot of other professions because of exactly what you said. We're required to be independent, impartial, objective, and required to perform assignments without bias. Do plumbers have those requirements? Do others have those requirements? They don't. It doesn't mean that it's okay for them to be biased, but those are our specific obligations as appraisers. So when we hear that we may be biased, I think it strikes a nerve with all of us.
It does.
But the one other thing I want to throw in there too is even if we fully believe we are being independent and impartial and objective, we are also relying on data that has been baked in for years. Neighborhood sales, neighborhood trends, information that's out there. It doesn't mean that we're choosing data to support some sort of partiality. It means that there may be trends in that data that has been built year upon year upon year, that
Right.
those markets have been affected by an overall racism or trends in those areas. So in other words, how accurate is the data to make an impartial, objective decision? I think that's a question that is one worth examining.
Yeah. And Scott, so what would your company's position be? This says right here in black and white, appraiser interviews show that some take racial and ethnic composition of the neighborhood into consideration when selecting comparable homes. I mean, if you had an appraiser say, yeah, I do that, I'm that guy, what would your company's position be with that particular appraiser that's on your panel?
We'd probably submit them to the risk committee for review and removal from the panel
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. I mean, there's just no room in our profession for that type of behavior.
No, I mean, just to add a little on top, I think you and John both did a really good lead into this conversation. And I think the thing that's most important for us as appraisers is the point that's striking the nerve. It does hit us all right away and put up defense mechanisms that we're out there saying we're not racist, right? And we are have these ethical obligations and we take them very seriously. And I think what's most important right now is that we set those defense mechanisms down, we listen, and we pay attention to these scenarios that you opened with, Bryan. And those are just a few examples. So how can we as a profession look to continue to improve and solve for these scenarios where that's not happening? And how do we create processes that can help to reduce bias? Even though it's an ethical obligation, what other things can be instilled that can help protect from biases being interjected into our profession, to protect the rest of the profession as well from folks like you just mentioned at the start of this conversation?
Yeah. So Diana and Melissa, you both are instructors. You've taught classes throughout the country, as I have, and probably Scott and John. I know that they at least speak at events on a regular basis. I want to ask you guys about your students, right? Because you're instructing courses with appraisers, working appraisers in these classes. And I remember many years ago, I was teaching a live class, and there was an elderly gentleman. He was probably 80 or 85 years old. And he probably didn't want some young 40-something-year-old dude telling him how to do appraisal work, you know? And so I understand that. So I was trying to tread lightly, but then he started saying women, you know, and it was almost like every other comment. Yeah, well, that's a woman for, you know, women appraiser, you know. And so finally I went up to him and I said, can I speak to you outside a moment? I took him out in the hallway and I said, sir, would you like your money back? And he said, excuse me? I said, well, if you're not happy here today, we'll refund you your money and you can be on your way, because, you know, you keep making these comments about women. And first of all, I don't appreciate that. And so I have several female appraisers in the room right now, and they probably don't appreciate it either. So if you can stop that, you're welcome to stay. But if you don't feel like you can stop that, you need to leave, and you need to leave now. You know, maybe some say, well, that was his generation. I don't know. But Melissa, have you had appraisers in your classes that have made comments that kind of make you go, whoa, dude, wait a minute?
Well, I can say this, that I have not had specific comments that, there have been times when perhaps it was, a tone kind of alluded itself to that. And I first off quickly put an end to that, as you did, in a respectful manner, because that's just absolutely not something that you wish to have ripple through your classroom. And, it's not even a discussion that should be had, in my opinion, openly, simply because we go back to, and you said it best to begin, we're the definition of an appraiser. We're independent, we're impartial, and we're objective. And if we have any type of bias like that, it opens doors to other negatives. Okay, so no, I would not allow that in a classroom, but I will go to the flip of that and say, thankfully, I don't see that. And thankfully, what I see with appraisers when I discuss, and I do discuss in classes, what is happening right now with diversity and inclusion and, bias and that sort of thing. And what I do see is all races, appraisers being offended by, we're not biased. Why would someone accuse it? So I like to see that they're offended by that, because that means that they are making an effort and they are doing things correctly, the way that they should be. And so, but I also think it gives us an awareness that make sure, check up on yourself, make sure that you're not discriminating in any way or have any preconceived ideas that that may cloud your judgment. The absolute best case scenario is that we absolutely never see a homeowner, a seller, a buyer, photos, anything. We don't know anything about their ethnic backgrounds. We know nothing about their religious affiliations. That's an ideal world. But for the most part, Brian, no, I haven't had to deal with that, thankfully.
Good. What about you, Diana? I mean,
I actually have. So it has happened in my classes before. And, for me, I try to handle it by helping what I consider the the ignorant and uneducated individual who has made such a comment more informed. And the first thing that I do is I say what you just said without your intent, I'm sure, is offensive. And so let me clarify why it's offensive and why we can't continue with that type of discussion. That's how I've handled that. Now, one of the comments that's in the chat room right now, which is right on target, which we do need to address, and says, you know,
Yeah, read that. Diana, read the whole. I think you're talking about Rick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, read that out so all the viewers know.
No one should value property to either exclude or include anyone.
Mhm.
Understanding markets is different. Orthodox Jews don't ride on Sabbath. A house in walking distance of a synagogue has more value. And you see, I would look at that and I would say, all right, let's work with the demographics of a location and the preferences of that demographics in that location, and not get into the religious, not get into the specifics of what a religion is, because unfortunately, even by saying, you know, I remember asking a Catholic priest once, you know, why do you make the sign of the cross? And he said, because Protestants don't, you know, and he laughed and said, you know, we're just different, you know. And he was trying to make light of it. And I think in this instance, what we have is a neighborhood where there are demands for walking, you know, the sidewalks and that. And I don't think you have to say, you know, houses have more value here because the large demographic population is Jewish. I don't think you have to say that at all. I don't think you have to say church or synagogue. I think what you say is that residential demands are, you know, they want an easy way to get to work, an easy way to get to school, and an easy way to worship. And in this particular location, that transportation artery is met on all levels. And you've never said a thing about who lives there or why, you know, why they chose that location. I think that we have to work. I always go there. I learned this a long time ago. There's an acronym called Fresh Corn. And if you think about fresh corn, the acronym, you can kind of gear yourself to understand. And the R and the E and the O mean, in fresh and in corn mean equal opportunity. But when you go at it from F is familial status, R is race, S is sexual gender, H is handicap, C is color, R is religion, and N is national origin. Now, if you can think about those characteristics and say to yourself, how am I blocking myself from these considerations? Don't try to find the cause from a personal. You know, you can say smoking is not allowed, but you can't say non-smokers only. There's a difference. And the difference is one is looking at the person and one is looking at the expectations of occupancy. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, I think you avoid all that. But yes, unfortunately, it's still out there. It's still among us. And so when I see it, when I hear it, I don't get ugly about it because, you know, I don't want to start a fight, but I will end it, and I will end it peacefully.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that you have to go about it.
And
You know, that hang on one second, Melissa. I think you brought up a really good point there, Diana. And when you said, you know, think about flying on a plane, you know, they make it very clear smoking is not allowed on this flight,
Right.
you know, even in the bathroom,
Right.
right? You can't smoke, but they don't say smokers aren't allowed on this plane.
Correct.
That's the big differentiation there, right? Melissa, you had a follow up?
well, I just wanted to say, kind of following what Diana just said, you do not have to speak about the demographics in that area, but when we're looking at value as the the person that wrote in the chat, the values are greater. Well, the market's going to bring that out. The prior sales are going to bring that out. So in line with what Diana said, and it's followed up by the comparable sales and what they're speaking. The market speaks the volumes. The appraiser only reports it.
Yeah. So Scott, there's a comment here. Oh, excuse me. Margie is asking, have not received one doable order. I'm not sure what that means. Lenders should have never ordered the hybrid AVM, etc. Order attached, pictures abandoned. Lenders can be biased when choosing the correct type of form assignment. I'm not sure I fully understand that. Kay, we'll lump it into a couple questions for you, Scott. Kay says AVMs are limited to numeric property characteristics. They struggle with non-numerical aspects like location, quality, condition, view, and utility. So how about a couple of those, Scott, if you want to try and tackle those?
Yeah, so I mean, I think on the AVM comment, look, that's why appraisers are important, right? That's why we have, in my mind, a bright future in front of us to stay relevant, because AVMs are known to be, especially on what they call tails, right? The tails of the bell curve, they're off far. And it's because of those factors that they're not able to consider or take into consideration when they generate a value. When you're in a very homogeneous area and homes are all very similar and and the condition is a newer development and there's been repeat sales that are, highly usable, AVMs are great and they can give you a super accurate understanding of value. So it's understanding how and where AVMs can be utilized and in that process. But I also believe that points to why, we believe appraisers are very important for the future. And I think most stakeholders do as well. I think that's something appraisers should be confident in and continue to produce a high quality report and result, because the folks who really care, they want to see appraisers continue in this profession. And I mentioned a good handful of them at the beginning of this call. Those stakeholders really value appraisers and they're not looking to AVMs to replace appraisers at all. On the other topic, I think that most of these products are not chosen based off those factors. If I understand Maggie's comment or question there, these are based off of very algorithmic programs that generate what type of product can be used in which type of scenario. And I believe too, with hybrid, honestly, I think it's a great way to reduce bias. It's one of the most positive aspects of a hybrid process. When you take the appraiser out of the equation from interacting with any parties to the transaction at all, and you give them high fidelity, high quality, comprehensive, authenticated source data that cannot be manipulated to use in their appraisal process, you are taking away any potential chance for bias. Look, I was on the board of real estate appraisers in Colorado for 2 terms. Appraisers are known for pointing the camera in the other direction just as well. So, and you mentioned those appraisers at the beginning of this call or this conversation. When we introduce a quality process that can be leveraged and remove the appraiser from parties to the transaction, you are removing all kinds of bias, whether it's racial bias, religious bias, confirmation bias. It all improves. So I think there are concepts that we should all be thinking about when we can remove the appraiser from interacting with parties to the transaction or being left to choose how they want to present the property characteristics on their own behalf.
So John,
I don't know a lot about regression analysis. I don't even begin to call myself a statistician, but I know the basics. You have dependent variables and independent variables. And so when you're talking about developing these AVMs and these regression models, bias can exist because the model is tailored for the person who wants the output. So, it doesn't matter whether it's a human being messing up or a AVM who only knows what numbers it was told to use. It begins with a human being making an entry, making a decision, making a judgment. And so, I favor the appraiser. Obviously I do, because I want that comfort, that confidence in knowing that's the person that is there, that is looking out for for the public and not necessarily even me, because I mean, how many of us have dealt with angry buyers because we did not conclude the market that supported a purchase price that they were willing to pay, you know, and they're mad. They're like, well, you know, it's worth more than that. We say it's worth more than that. Well, go pay more than that. That's fine. You didn't ask me, you know, I'm not trying to kill your loan. I'm trying to tell you what the market is telling me, and then you make your decision.
You know, what's interesting is one of the first classes I took on regression many years ago, I drove up to Indiana. I didn't need CE. Oh my God. I actually took a course for the education, believe it or not. And the gentleman put this scattered graph up on, and he said, all these little dots represent sales. And you had a trend line that was going down, right? Showing a declining market. And he said, now watch what I do. You see all these little low sales? And he started erasing them. And guess what happened to the trend line? I mean, it straightened right up, right? And he said, now what did I just do? And I raised my hand. I said, you manipulated the data? And he said, well, Brian's right. I did manipulate the data, but I had a reason. And you'd have to verify these were foreclosure sales. So we took them out of the equation. And I'm fine with taking out extreme high, extreme low. But to Diana's point, you can manipulate the data, right? The output is only as good as the input, and you can massage that. We got a couple of other questions, and then I wanted to ask John a couple of questions of my own. So John Martin says, the market shows bias it wants and needs. The appraiser analyzes results, not why these selections of comparables are made. Any comments on that?
Well, yeah, actually, I do want to make a comment on that. So one of the things, and I'm going to give you kudos because half your panel is made up of these lovely women who are friends of mine. But I will say that one of the issues that we have in our profession is there are too many old white guys like me, male, pale, and stale. And, and until we start getting more diversity in this profession, for people that have different backgrounds, that live in different neighborhoods, that live in different areas, that can understand better some of those nuances. Just like the question that was pointed out about the synagogue and their proximity. Do you think that every appraiser appreciates those nuances? Do you think that those are recognized? So I think that we need to work towards the day where the appraiser profession more closely resembles the overall population. And I think some of these biases, quote unquote, may tend to go away.
Let me ask you my questions. Earlier, you mentioned unconscious biased. So I'm biased. I didn't even know I was biased. I mean, that's what you're saying. And then number two, Scott mentioned confirmation bias. Can you speak on those two items, please?
Sure. I think, first of all, on the unconscious bias, that is, it's very much as it sounds. We go in there and we pound our fists and say, I'm not biased. And I don't think that there is a large conscious bias problem. I don't think there are a group of appraisers that that are going to sit around and say, hey, this is how it has to be. We are not going to do these values in these properties. We all get enraged when we hear that. But do we, for example, go into a mixed neighborhood, and when we start searching in our minds, okay, we don't have any comps here. Let me look for a competing neighborhood. How do I determine what a competing neighborhood is? What are those thoughts that go into my head? Well, of course, I've got my training in almost 40 years of appraisal to try to understand the market nuances in those areas. But the bottom line is, I'm not that buyer, and I may not be looking at the same things they look at as competing neighborhoods, and I may not even be aware of that. So I may put my own personal feelings into that. And that is a way that you have unconscious bias. You don't know that you're actually acting in a way that could have bias. This is probably a far bigger problem than the conscious bias that I think that all of us get so infuriated about. As far as the confirmation bias, I'll let Scott touch on that if he wants, but essentially, if you really want to wrap in a picture, that's the old argument of why does the appraiser even get the purchase contract when they do the appraisal? Because let's
pause right there. And I want to do rapid fire because we really are, the show's over. But if you guys can let me keep you an extra 5 minutes, rapid fire, it's got to be a very concise answer. I mean, like 2 seconds. Ready? Should the appraiser get a copy of the purchase agreement? John, yes or no?
Yes.
Scott, yes or no?
Yes.
Diana, yes or no?
USPEP says yes, I say no.
Should we change USPEP? Melissa, should the appraiser get a copy of the purchase agreement? Yes or no?
My personal opinion is no. I'd rather not have it because then I'm a blank slate.
Yeah,
And
so
that's what I need
Diana and I had a conversation about this a few years ago, and it's actually on my website. You can go look at that. You know, I have strong feelings about that, you know, and the thing is, I know there's a whole host of reasons why maybe the appraiser needs a contract. If I'm buying this room and it's, hey, I'm John, you got to put hardwood floors in it before I buy it. Okay, we agree. Then the appraiser needs to know that because I'm not buying what the appraiser's seeing today. I'm buying it subject to the installation of hardwood flooring. So you need to know that. I get that. Maybe there's a whole host of things you need to know, but couldn't you give the appraiser that information without telling them the specific price? And lenders could still make a lending decision. If I come in, I don't know the sale price. I appraise it for 150 and it's under contract for 152. Who cares? The lender could still proceed and make that loan.
Yeah,
but I think the big problem is it gives the appraiser a crutch. It gives them a target. You're talking about confirmation bias. I think many times appraisers look at that contract and say, oh, okay, it's 150. That's where I'm going to start looking for sales. And that's not our job.
But Brian, that I'd see, I'm telling you as an appraiser, I want every piece of data I can get. I determine what that means.
All right.
I go out there and the broker gives me 2 pages of sales. That does not mean that that's where my value is. Just like if I get a purchase contract, that doesn't mean that's where my value is. I want all the information I can get. I'm independent, I'm impartial, I'm objective. It doesn't matter what I get. I'm going to treat it properly.
So that's perfect. If all of the appraisers said the exact same thing you just said, John, I wouldn't have a problem with you getting the contract. Sadly, that's not happening with a lot of the appraisers out there. You and I both know that, and that's sad. You guys, if you're looking at a contract and you're letting that steer you in a direction, then you're not unbiased. You're letting a piece of paper bias you.
That's right. You're anchoring.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Brian, I think you could have a whole hour podcast on this topic.
Can I add something to
All right. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go for an extra hour. No, we're not. Melissa, go ahead, Melissa.
What I'd like to add to that is let me give you my rationale for not wanting the contract because of exactly what's being discussed. It has an appearance of anchoring to that amount. It has an appearance of steering to that amount. Yeah. If I don't have it, then that doesn't enter into the discussion at all. If I don't have the contract, the conditions of the contract, terms of the contract, perhaps, as Brian said, leave out the dollar amount, because you see, then if I don't have it, I can't be accused of doing something that I have no intention of doing and I'm not doing. So it's one of those things. It keeps you more honest, if that sounds like a better way.
Fannie Mae said many, many years ago, if 95% of our appraisals come back at the sale price or greater, why do we need appraisers? And that's really a good question, guys. If you're just going to appraise it for the sale price, they don't need you. They can just make loans based on the sale price. So do what John said. Don't let that steer you in a direction. Develop your independent, impartial, unbiased opinion of value. That's really what the lending community wants, believe it or not. Guys, you've got till February 26th. That's the deadline to submit your comments. We encourage you to do so. Ben, if you could put the email address in, it's appraisal, RFI at FHFA.gov. That's the email address that you would submit your comments no later than February 26th. I'm going to tell you February 25th, so it gives you a day, right? I'm bad about procrastinating. I bought a book called The Art of Procrastination. I haven't read it yet, but I'm planning on it. All right. One last thing, guys. In the very back, there are questions that they're asking. Okay. And on biased, it asks, what are the fair housing impacts of the current FHFA and enterprises policy and procedures on appraisals and valuations? And how can these policies be changed to further fair housing? Well, one thing that I would say, I'm a real estate agent too. I just renewed, and you've got to take a certain number of hours of law. And I just took mine on fair housing. And so, we're forced to take that periodically. Just rapid fire to my panelists again. John, do you think that would be beneficial if somebody developed a course on fair housing? Because maybe there's some people out there that don't know. It's that unconscious bias you said. When we talk about ethics, and I always tell people, I'm no saint, ask my ex-wife. But when it comes to my appraisal practices, I try and always do the right thing, right? Now, I think some people think some things are unethical when they're not unethical. Like, could you appraise a property in which you have a prospective interest? Yes or no?
Yes.
You can. But so many of my viewers right now are saying, absolutely not. You can't do it. Yes, you can. USPAP allows you to do that. You just have to disclose it. That's all. So maybe we educate people on what's ethical, what's not ethical. Maybe we educate people on biased and what's unbiased, right? For those out there that do suffer from that unconscious bias, yes or no? Should somebody develop a course on this? Should it be a mandated course for appraisers?
Well, let me just jump in here real quick. Two things. Number one, there are courses, and from what I understand, the Appraiser Qualifications Board is actually considering making that a requirement similar to USPAP for every renewal or for every couple of years or whatever. But also, don't forget, there's some real good advice from the Appraisal Standards Board in Advisory Opinion 16 in USPAP about fair housing. So if there are any questions or look for quick guidance, I would suggest that all our appraisers watching this should check that out as well.
Hey, for all my panelists, thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry I kept you over 7 minutes today. For those of you watching, there's a few questions there that we didn't get to, and I apologize. We will copy those questions to all of our panelists, and maybe some of our panelists can reach out to you directly and answer some of those questions. You've been watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. For all my guests, Ms. Diana Jacob, Melissa Bond, Scott Rose, John Brenan, and even Ben Maxwell that just pops in and out once in a while. I'm your host, Bryan Reynolds. Until next time, happy appraising, guys. Reach out to us if you'd like to be on the program or know someone that would be a great guest. We'd love and be honored to have them on the program. Thank you very much and stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Okay, I'm about to end the stream in just 1 second. There's just a 20-second delay. So if you got to go, you got to go. Thank y'all for staying after.
Yeah, guys. Thanks. Somebody just put, let's go the extra hour.
I was like, well, I don't know if I can do